Welcome back. To start this episode off, I'd like to thank you all for your patience during hiatus. Nothing still firmly holds the role of flagship series on my channel, so I was a little bit apprehensive when I announced that I was going to be slowing my roll a bit on it. Universally, people were quite respectful about the whole thing, and that made the process much easier for me, but we're back, so let's get to work. When we last left off, I was still grasping and clawing my way towards an assembly line to try and punch through into Louvre tier technologies. In retrospect, that seems like a less than optimal strategy. The thing with later tiers is that you need a staggering amount of stuff to really do anything of value, and I know better than to try and punch through without solidifying my tech base. As a general rule, you need to firmly establish your technology before you start grabbing more advanced stuff, and I broke that rule here and got burned for it. Looking back on it, I can only conclude that my motivation to get one of these things working had far more to do with maintaining good episode pacing than it did intelligent planning, and I will have to keep that in mind for the future. Applying that philosophy, my first task is not going to be to finish the problematically abbreviated assembly line. It is instead going to be ripping through my factory to resolve bottlenecks in production speed. The first one you've been watching me patch up already, and that is my horrible habit of programming recipes to only craft one of something. Multi-block machines have parallel crafting for a reason, and not exploiting this to its fullest capacity is both profoundly inefficient and profoundly stupid. The second is less of an immediate bottleneck, but I need more wood tar byproducts. My ammonia production is largely unable to keep up with all of my ore processing demands, and upgrading that requires sourcing more hydrogen. And producing more polybenzim or whatever the heck it's called needs a surprising amount of this stuff as well. All of those materials come from wood tar distilling, and right now the weakest link in that is my distillation setup, in large part because it's serving the dual purpose as also being part of my plant line. I'm a little ways off from getting a distillation machine that can paralyze, so my only option is to make more of them, but they're super cheap, so that's fine. Another problem I'm running into is the processing speed of my assembling machines. For incidental crafting that only requires a handful of items, they're fine, but I have gotten into the habit of, for example, crafting quad uranium fuel rods in sets of 100. Since that recipe is run through a machine that processes all of my frequency for assembling, this has the side effect of stalling out any other crafting builds that, say, require frame boxes for 10 to 20 minutes at a time. There are multiple multi-block variants of assemblers, not to be confused with the assembly line, but most of them are a couple tiers away still or too expensive at the moment, so I have to make do with upgrading all of my single block variants and eating the energy cost. Pro tip: giant ore balls spawn creepers. This is marginally inconvenient, and is recommended that you do something to prevent that from happening for reasons that should be fairly apparent. Also, ignore the tortured gas noises in the background. That's just my system refilling its chlorine buffer. Once that mess is cleaned out, down comes another rock. This one is special though because it has a bunch of Nequata ore. For those who have to ask, yes, Nequata as in the fancy unexplanium that was used in that sort of popular TV show a while ago. Gregtech has run out of normal metals to make things out of and is now just straight up making stuff up. I'm less interested in it for its magical unexplanium properties, and mostly just want it to make coil blocks and use in my eternal quest for spicy metal bricks. Speaking of spicy metal bricks, one of the largest pain points in my factory setup was waiting on EBS to process raw materials into a usable form. I got around this problem a little bit by upgrading the living daylights out of them, but that just made me run out of power. I upgraded my power, but then I expanded my production lines, and that just resulted in me having power problems again, so the end result was everything just broke down the same way it broke before, and I lost power even faster. There is probably a graceful way of handling that. Well, actually no, there probably isn't. There probably isn't a graceful way of handling this, so I've applied what I would like to call the hammer of overwhelming material superiority, and slammed down a third, somewhat simplified vac nuke setup. Side note, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. This has been your Fun Goose factoid of the day. Rather than bothering with all the fancy rah-rah automation nonsense, I've instead done the bare minimum to keep the thing from blowing up, and have wired up this industrial arm to do, this, whenever it needs more fuel. I've done the math, and with fuel rods lasting a hair over 5 hours, I should have enough clean pairs of pants in my wardrobe to maintain the system for a couple of days before I have to do laundry. Since doing all of this laundry almost certainly will take less time than it would for me to recreate the meme-fueled Eldritch Nightmare that is currently running the main power system, I consider this to be a significantly more efficient option. And where is all of this lovely power going, you ask? Why, to my brand new EBF setup, which are no longer EBFs and are instead something called a Volcanus. Because this is Gregtech. Not only are there better multi-blocks for your single block machines, there are better multi-blocks for your multi-block machines too, because this Modpack has zero chill. I will admit, I don't quite know exactly how effective parallelization is going to work with these, but 8 is a big number, and my working theory here boils down to, wow, these are expensive, so they must be better, plus they have some passive properties that should speed up production no matter how stupidly I use them. Even better, since the system is using linked input buses which share an inventory, parallelization, also known as a fancy way of saying just do more of it, is super easy as long as I keep them running in sets of 4. Of course, doing this requires me to reprogram all of my smelting settings, but that's been such a constant task in my modern factory that it's sort of like breathing at this point. That is to say, it's mildly annoying, but it isn't particularly complicated unless I'm being drowned in a toilet by an assassin wearing a clown suit. Given the general lack of homicidal clowns in my environment, or, for that matter, toilets, I am unconcerned by this. This actually brings up another interesting point. The better EBF system brings up an interesting point, not the clowns drowning people in toilets. For a good long while, I have been subsisting off of helium extracted from endstone dust that I centrifuged a really long time ago. I've been able to source a little bit more passively by producing noble gases from my nitrogen extraction systems, but at the rate that I'm blowing through it, I'm set to run out any moment. Not only does this mean I don't get to smelt anything fun in my brand new nuclear-powered hotbox, it also means that I don't get to have any fun with fusion reactors once I get them, because I am sort of maybe just a little bit entirely unable to produce fusible gases at the moment. I could solve this problem by spinning up my stone lily farm again, but that is lame and slow, and involves growing plants that I have to take care of. This is instead going to be a job for Gregtech. Now, at this point, you're probably going, okay, Goose, why did you just make an obnoxiously over-engineered cobblestone generator? We stopped needing those by episode 6. You are correct. This is, in fact, an obnoxiously over-engineered cobblestone generator, and I did stop needing them by episode 6 because I have better ways of producing cobble. What you're forgetting is that the special sauce has yet to be added, and that special sauce is magic. Or, more specifically, Thumbcraft. Remember those ender saplings that I made ages ago to try and get Alianus Essentia from? That isn't their only use. Part of their gimmick is that they will spawn end-dimension mobs under their leaves, much like the peaceful sapling does to passive mobs. Unlike the peaceful sapling, this tree also has a corrupting effect on the local landscape, and certain blocks, of which cobblestone happens to be one, can turn into obsidian or endstone. Macerating endstone gives impure endstone dust and tungstate, and impure endstone dust can be processed to return helium, which is useful for all sorts of things, but also helium-3, an isotope that is essential for early-stage fusion crafting. It also yields platinum metallic powder, more tungstate, and enough sand to build a beach out of, so my production demands for all of those are going to be more than satisfied as well. On second thought, better double it up. Wouldn't want to run out of endstone, after all. So, this disaster solves the endstone issue, now for the maceration stack. My macerating setup is good, but between all this endstone and the non-stop mining operations I'm conducting, I don't have a hope of processing everything faster than I produce it. Conveniently, there is an upgrade chip that lets you do even more stuff even faster. I make that, slam it in, and we are off to the races. Oh, and I have to switch out the casing. I forgot I had to do that. Fun little unintended side effect of my gas farm, all those trash drops make for really excellent singularity fodder. I need something called singularities to use as a crafting ingredient for various things, and each one of them requires a small quantity of 500,000 random items to be fed into something called a matter condenser. Normally, this would be a bit complicated, but with the power of looting 200, all this means is that I have to disable the automatic voiding of the 90% of the things the mob farm drops that I don't want to store, and it will fill up in no time. And you get an upgrade. And you get an upgrade. You, sir, you get an upgrade. Everyone gets an upgrade. Except the ghasts. Those just get farmed. The 30-something minutes of water torture via ghast screeching pays off in the form of a single singularity, which is the last ingredient I need for a very, very special toy. Meet the wireless everything terminal. If you can do it via a terminal on your ME system, you can do it with this sucker. I waste a shin-breaking amount of time running around to access a very limited set of terminals that I've stood up around my base, and this lets me circumvent all of that. We're on Wi-Fi, and it's 5G. Having all the smelting power in the world might be nice, but it doesn't really help all that much when everything that comes out of said smelters is too hot to touch, as is the case with basically every ingot in the game. And my poor beleaguered vacuum freezers don't have a hope of catching up once my new volcani get cracking. There are 2 upgrades to the multi-block vacuum freezer. One, the Gregtech++ one, is obnoxious, requires a large quantity of annoying to produce alloys and fiddly components, but has a decent set of passive bonuses and consumes significantly less power. The second is the sister structure to the Mega EBF I used tier skip way back when I still cared about that sort of thing, and aside from costing a bunch of circuits and enough aluminum to package a small high school's worth of energy drinks, it's basically free, and allows for an utterly ridiculous 256 times paralyzation as long as you have the power for it. Seeing as the latter is going to be something I need anyway, and it is straight up just cheaper to make, you can guess which one I went with. One of the really neat things that auto-building with schematics can do is pull materials needed to make multi-blocks out of your ME system directly. This system is terrible about placing interface blocks, so usually I do those by hand and wire them up, but for everything else it works really well. After spending several hours doing a Cybertruck's worth of optional upgrades, my base is finally at the point where I feel comfortable pushing into Louvre tier voltage. Which means assembly lines need to happen. Now that I've had a chance to sit back and let all my circuit crafting bills catch up, making one of these is not terribly problematic. It still takes 5 hours, mind you, but I only have one circuit assembler and can't be bothered to paralyze, so most of that was my fault, but at least now, making it doesn't make me want to shave myself bald, put on a clown suit, and drown someone in a toilet, so that's an improvement. Exotic forms of HOM aside, automating this is pretty simple to do with applied energistics. Well, it was simple for me. I just stole someone else's design off the New Horizons wiki and put it in. Figuring out the solution probably took a lot of time for whoever made it, but that is why intellectual property does not exist in Minecraft. I would love to give you an explanation of how it works, but that would be incredibly boring, so we will instead just take it on faith that it does and move on. In order to tell the assembly line what it is doing, we need to scan a recipe for it. I have no idea why they made the scanning process take so long, but see you all in 7.5 minutes. One lunch break later, I now have programmed recipes. These go in the assembly line, patterns go in the interface, and out comes a motor. Once I can figure out why the thing is not working, there we go. Typos in the storage buses, the bane of every systems engineer. As with every tier, Louvre brings with it new multi-blocks, new material demands, and increasing demands on pre-existing production. Because I'm being a smart cookie this time and not blasting ahead like a lunatic leaving my production capacity in the dust, let's work on fixing some of those production issues now, before I have a mental breakdown because all my recipes suddenly require 32,000 buckets of unobtainium. Or, in this case, oxygen. I've been making do by using the zombie farm to produce calcite, and while I find it hilarious that mob farms are still forming a crucial backbone of my mid-game production lines, I'm still running into trouble physically crafting XP buckets fast enough, and every autocrafter I have on calcite is one that isn't producing wood tar, which I'm also struggling to maintain in excess of. Introducing our new hero, Swede. Sugar is like 80% oxygen when electrolyzed, making it a great source of the stuff if you can get enough. Sugarcane and reed farms are right out until I get a multi-block farming option, but I happen to have a secret weapon that for once isn't a looting 200 spike, though I might also use that if this doesn't work. That's where Swede comes in. It's a weed, but sugary. It grows stupidly fast, drops sugar and sugarcane when broken, and has a personality that I can only describe as a demon-infested crossbreed between kudzu and the entire Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. On its own, it already makes for a pretty respectable sugar farming option if you ignore its habit of ruthlessly monopolizing any free grass or dirt block within a 5-kilometer radius. But it gets worse. Not only does Swede respond to the Fortune enchantment when broken, not only does it work in Ender.io farming stations, it also responds well to open block sprinklers. Yeah. We aren't going to be needing oxygen for a little bit. Now that oxygen is firmly included, let's get cracking. The first step in Louvre is another processing line. Yay, and skip. You want me to make a what? To make a what? Do I seriously look like I have the time to blow another 5 hours doing some fiddly little micromanagement project for the sake of a visual gag to the benefit of literally nobody just because it seemed like a funny idea at the time?
5 hours later.
During this entire process of me doing a visual gag to the benefit of literally nobody just because someone thought it was funny at the time, I discovered that I misconfigured one of my filters on my ore processing setup. Since I am no longer poor and am sick and tired of having to redo the entire thing every time I have a little boo-boo or want to change how I process something, I took this as a sign that I needed to rip the entire thing out and switch over to an AE2 storage bus-powered subnetted architecture. Which is a very fancy way of saying I beat it over the head with ME parts until the problem went away. I would say that this is massive overkill if it weren't for the fact that it is quite demonstrably not. My next achievement comes in the form of crafting Louvre tier energy hatches. Huzzah! I don't have the power production to use these, but, you know, I'm working on that. Maybe? Mostly I just need them because I am ever so slightly too poor to craft a critical ingredient called Mar-C-M200 steel. No, that will not be on the test. Yes, it takes 5 minutes to do a single batch, but no, I do not actively play this game anymore. Yes, I just let it run in the background. This mod pack has essentially just turned into an idle game that doubles as a space heater. And yep, there we go. Don't worry, folks. Despite very much sounding like a meltdown alert, it's not. It's just a reminder to switch out the fuel rods on my aux power. I really ought to be doing something about that, but I have so many regular uranium fuel rods, it just seems a waste not to use them. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 hours later, I finished the next progression blocker in the form of the precise auto-assembler multi-block. Because I am on to this game's shenanigans, I made two, because at this point, if the game says that a machine has multiple modes, it's a fair bet that I'm going to want access to all of them at all times. This also provides me with an excellent opportunity to recycle all of my old input buses and hatches. The casing block for this machine is ridiculously slow to make at my current tech level, largely because of my inability to overclock my smelting system fast enough to keep up with the material demands. But, for some reason, this machine just lets you replace like half of it with input and output buses and hatches of energy tiers well below the actual machine, so they cost like 8 ingots of steel and some glue. So no, I'm not entirely certain why you can get away with this, but I'm absolutely going to do it in the future for any machine dumb enough to let me slam more hatches and buses on it than strictly necessary. I'm not paying the costs for this thing. No, I don't care how unoptimal it is. So, why do we care about these things at all? Well, for one, they're a multi-block assembling machine that accepts energy from hatches and does parallel processing. So that means single block assemblers are now obsolete, which is nice, I guess. It wasn't really a problem that needed solving, but sure, faster crafting is more gooder or something. The really important thing is that they let me make a second multi-block machine called a neutron accelerator. Unlike the dissolution tank, this one has, wait for it, 10 whole recipes. Wow. Its novel new mechanic is that to successfully craft with it, you have to keep a number called neutron kinetic energy within a certain range by carefully balancing how much power you feed it, because too much or too little results in failed recipes or an earth-shattering kaboom, sans Q-36 explosive space modulator. This is surely going to be a super complicated and automation-intense process that requires a deep technical dive into the— Nope, it requires a machine controller cover, 3 pieces of redstone, and a sensor that is part of the required structure. At least I can process Snequata now, so that was fun, I guess. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. It turns out I actually needed 2 neutron accelerators, and will eventually need 5. My bad, such an easy mistake to make. This one takes some of the dust from the other one and bangs more neutrons into it to form other dusts. How interesting. All of this, combined with another little bit of waiting, results in an infrastructure capable of producing my next round of coil upgrades. Don't get too excited, we're not going to be keeping them around for very long. And there you go, the second coil upgrade. I have no idea why they made you do this for an extra 300 degrees of heat capacity, but whatever, they're done. Supposedly they're an optional upgrade, but I've learned that optional mostly just means not technically impossible to complete the game without it, so we're getting them anyway. But this is, sadly, as far as I can go, since trinium recoils will require ZPM tier assembling. We aren't all that far off from it, but let's maybe stabilize my tech in this tier before gallivanting off to the next one, yeah? Step 1 of stabilizing my stuff is faster ore mining. This isn't technically a must-have just yet, but I'm starting to run out of indium, and the only way I can really source that right now is sphalerite. Yes, I will end up collecting a bunch of excess junk, but that's a problem for the ME system to handle. Louvre introduces a number of useful technologies that let me upgrade my multi-blocks, and I want basically all of them. The first is a chemical plant, which until recently has kind of occupied this weird space of being potentially useful, but not so potentially useful that I wanted to pull the trigger and actually make one. In the lower tiers, all it can do is produce some slightly difficult to get chemicals more efficiently, which is okay, but I never did power generation options that required them, so it was kind of whatever. In higher tiers, however, it's used for crafting machine components, and several things required for progression, so I kind of need to get it going now. The second bit of tech is a glorious machine called a tree growth simulator, and it is paired up with the return of an old friend in the form of the pyrolyse oven. My zombie farm, for all of its upgrades, is still quite limited in its ability to produce charcoal, largely as the result of my inability to craft buckets of experience fast enough. While there are probably a number of ways to get around this, I don't really care because I have other things that I want to spend my time fixing, and I can now produce charcoal much more efficiently just by using one of these. The tree growth simulator is a very simple machine. Give it a sapling and some energy and a tool, and it will produce wood products. Give it more energy and better tools, and it will produce more wood products. Give it even more energy and even better tools, and it will produce even more wood products. This results in a machine capable of producing 360 logs per second using only 1 IV amp of power, which at this point is essentially nothing. Since I'm still waiting on my fusion coils, let's get started on the circuitry lines. The first step to this process is, like everything else at this point, a long exercise in programming AutoFab lines, followed by a very short exercise in pushing a button to request the autocraft. This time, we are programming the creation of something called circuit imprints, because it's time to multi-block one of the last few systems that I'm still using single blocks for, namely my circuit assembler. But more on that in a second. Another bottleneck that I've been running into is issues with my distillation setup. I don't really need distillation too much due to my avoidance of anything and everything petroleum, but distillation is a step in a few ore processing lines, and all of my hydrogen is currently being sourced from wood tar, so I need to speed that up. Thankfully, this is easily, by which I mean it only took 6 hours to autocraft, solved by swapping out the controller for one of the towers with a functionally identical controller with a different name called a Dagnote Distillus. This is as easy as pulling off all of the outdated output hatches and slapping the controller block in, but sure, this is definitely a different machine. Even better, the disk list comes with an upgrade chip, giving it a total of 12 parallels, in addition to all of the other bonuses it gets for being a, and I'm using some seriously italicized air quotes here, upgraded version of the multi-block. It even was almost worth the time it took to make it, so yay, victories, I guess. Back to circuit assembling. Circuit assemblers are charming machines, whose only goal seems to be being as expensive as possible while still being plausibly craftable. The controller for this thing is made entirely out of a solid block of Louvre-tier machine components thrown into a loose slurry, mixed in with roughly 4 stacks of quantum processors. As with every other crafting recipe thus far, this mostly just translates into a whole lot of waiting around because the materials don't matter anymore, only the processing time. As a multi-block, it also has the additional requirement of needing all of the extra wiring harness set up to automate the thing, though at least that was simpler than the assembly line for reasons. Those reasons are that the monstrously expensive multi-blocks that require this particular controller can ever only craft one kind of circuit. Period. No switching templates, no multitasking. Once it is programmed in, you're stuck with it. Astute viewers will notice that there are multiple kinds of circuits in the game, and that I use all of them pretty regularly. Because of this pointless infrastructure bloating mechanic, I need not 1, 2, or 3 of the things, I need 5. For now. 1 for each of the cheapest circuits of each tier all the way up to Louvre, and then I'm going to need some more to process post-Louvre circuitry. And then I'm going to need another one for every tier after that. And several more to post-process that circuitry up even higher. Though, admittedly, they should at least be cheaper to make then. So, continuing in my saga of the great AFK journey, after a solid 3 days of runtime, that's not play time, mind you, because the only thing I was playing during that time was YouTube videos. That was computer running on simulating the world time. My holy grail is finished, and I am now a fusion-capable civilization. What it cost, I shan't say, because frankly I don't even know at this point. I just programmed the system and pushed the go button, and then switched out the fuel rods every time the brown pants alarm went off. In normal Gregtech, this is the end of the game, and it represents a functionally infinite source of free energy forever. Unfortunately for me, I'm not trying to beat Gregtech, I'm trying to beat Gregtech New Horizons, which uses a fork version that looks at things such as functionally infinite free energy, and then has to point out that functionally infinite is still like 10 centimeters and 3 technology tiers below the you must be this tall to endgame line on the park sizing chart, so yeah. This is nice, but it doesn't really do anything. But of course, it wouldn't be Gregtech New Horizons without a pointlessly long spin-up time and waiting phase. Truly, I don't get to have nice things. In order to actually start this stupid thing, I need to accrue 60 million EU in its internal buffer, which hilariously is not a problem, given that that's like a third of my total maximum energy production over the period of 2 or 3 minutes. With that little fun grass-touching minigame out of the way, click! Here come the goodies! Now for my next project. Making things that can burn the plasma this thing produces. Because of course it doesn't just produce free energy, that would be too easy. No, you need another multi-block to do that. Well, that was easy. Boring, but easy. I would splice in the Jeopardy theme song if I wouldn't get DMCA'd, so, anyone got any good jokes? Anyway, those are done. I now have plasma turbines, so that means I have infinite free power forever, right? Not really. Fusion used to be really, really strong, and then it got nerfed into the sub-basement because we're not allowed to have strong things, and the way it was nerfed kind of means that Fusion isn't super scalable because of how my run works. That isn't the real problem, though. You see, I'm feeding my fusion reactor a combination of helium-3 and deuterium, and helium-3 is sourced from endstone, which, yeah, is infinite, but it also monopolizes my ore mass raider setup, and I would really rather use that for, macerating ore. Deuterium is currently a byproduct from atmospheric nitrogen extraction, so while it is also technically infinite, it is not infinite in large enough quantities to really be more than a novelty. So it's time to introduce the wonderful new tech of just throw a bang and energy hatch on it. This is probably going to be the title of my next episode because that's all I'm really going to be doing for the rest of the game, but in this one specific instance, it is worth explaining. The way you are supposed to sustain long-term helium fusion is with a combination of deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is supposed to be sourced from centrifuging hydrogen, and tritium is supposed to be sourced by centrifuging deuterium. So I can get all of this stuff directly from hydrogen, which is great. Issue being, my existing hydrogen setup would be less than happy if I wanted to plug it in directly into the endless void of power consumption. So, a much better way of doing this is just yanking hydrogen out of water because water is free and can be produced as fast as I pump it. But Goose, you ask, isn't electrolyzing water super energy intensive compared to other methods of production? To which I would reply, yes. But also, just throw a bang and energy hatch on it. But Goose, you ask again, isn't centrifuging all that hydrogen super time-consuming? To which I would reply a little yeah, but also just throw a bang and energy hatch on it. But Goose, what happens if you need more deuterium and tritium? Throw a bigger energy hatch on it. This game doesn't respect me, so why should I respect it by designing good or clever solutions to problems when I can instead just hit them with a hammer, turning my recording room into a sauna in the process? Or that's the theory at any rate, because plasma generation really is not that great in its native state at the moment. I might have another option or two that involves less turbo suck, but we will have to wait and see in the next episode. As mentioned in the previous one, new episodes for the series are probably going to be quite slow to come out given the whole gainful employment thing, and also the whole this game wastes your time in industrial quantities thing. So I hope you're enjoying RimWorld. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.